Hello everyone, my name is TS Page and welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God video. Today, we are going to be discussing part 1 of my Oryx 3 classes tier list. So the reason that I'm doing this series in 2 parts is because 1, it is almost impossible to do an Oryx 3 tier list by class with only one set of parameters. So what I'm going to be doing is setting it up into 2 separate tier lists based on different things. So this first one, as you can tell by the title, is more beginner based. So, by that I mean, these classes are 1, decent for survivability as well as being able to contribute with minimal risk. The reason that I want this to be the first criteria is as a relatively new player, I want you to survive, or the idea is to survive. But if you're surviving and not helping contribute any damage as well, you're in turn also making it harder to survive by making the fight go longer and HP scaling. 2. Can these classes serve viably as a 4-8 rather than an 8-8? Because not everyone learning or trying to do Oryx for the first time is going to bring an 8-8, and rightfully so. So how do these classes perform not fully maxed? And the third and final criteria is more of a tiebreaker if I'm really split between 2 tiers and I don't know exactly where to put it. How viable is the class at getting a first time completion? That'll be the tiebreaker criteria, and that's about all for the criteria. Having a set of criteria makes the tier list a lot harder to just ram and judge because it's defining my terms and then going with those terms, then you can judge and critique the list. And for the second list, which I'll be doing in the future, it'll be more towards in-game, when the class has optimal swap outs and is not just meant for new players learning the dungeon. At peak efficiency, how are those classes going to do? With that said, this first list is going to be assuming tops with minimal swap outs, and so the idea, if you want to comment or disagree with something saying, oh, but Rogue has Bloody Cloak, or Archer has Behemoth Quiver, blah blah blah, all this other stuff. No, we're assuming mostly base tops, maybe 1 or 2 decent swaps at best. So, with that said, let's hop straight in and start out with the Archer. If the Archer had shorter range, it would have no choice but to be an F tier. But simply because the bow has 3 shots, which is relatively easy to hit, and those 3 shots have pretty decent range, it manages to survive in D tier, which is why there is no F tier. Archer's ability does absolutely nothing for Oryx 3, and the bows themselves are really bad overall at doing damage. Archer has low speed, low def, so it's really just a bad class for Oryx 3. Assassin is an easy A tier for me. Now, Assassin is not great in most facets of the game, especially in late game, but trying to learn Oryx 3 and doing decent damage while learning Oryx 3, Assassin is not bad. It is not outside of the realm of possibility to do well over 50,000 damage just using poisons throughout the fight, and the dagger's range and the dagger's semi-recent buff allows the damage of the Assassin to be pretty decent, despite all things considered. So, Assassin, I think for newer players, with the 75 speed that it has as well, it's pretty decent at doing damage and getting out of sticky situations. Next up is the Samurai, and the Samurai is the definition of okay. The Samurai's defense is pretty solid and very nice to have in Oryx 3, which does a lot of high damage projectiles. But with that said, you are stuck with the Katana. Katana is not great for range for newer players, and the ability does not provide a long range option. So you're forced to go in on a slow class with decent defense to do damage. It's not a bad option, but it's definitely not one that I would recommend for trying to learn Oryx 3, or just generally contributing as a relatively newer Oryx 3 runner. And to save time, the Huntress and the Archer are basically the same class when it comes to Oryx 3, so I'm putting it right next to the Archer. Next up we have the Knight, and Knight is one of those more on the fence picks. I could put it both in C tier or an A tier, but I decided to go with B tier. The reason that I put the Knight in B tier is because it is really solid defensively, and is really good for pre-exalted Oryx 3. But post-exalted, you're mostly going to be running, and so you're going to have to get a lot of your damage in early to be viable with the Knight, but since you are going to be going in with the Knight, it makes sense that the class that has the most defense is the one that you're going to be going in on. The Samurai is just a downgraded Knight with less defense, so that's why the Knight is above Samurai and resides in B tier. The Mystic is one of those interesting ones because while it is a decent class overall, it's just not fantastic in Oryx 3 by any means, especially for newer players. low speed, not a great get out of jail free option. There's no basic heals that it has. The ability is pretty lackluster. The staff and robe combination though, overall is just a much better combo in general for doing damage from distance than the archer and huntress. And with that said, I'm going to put the mystic in C tier. I really debated putting it in D tier, but the problem is the mystic can curse and has a lot of decent use even if you just spam the spacebar while in besa. So I think it has a place in C tier. Next up is the Necromancer, and while I initially thought about putting it in C tier, it quite clearly to me is a B tier. If you think about the Mystic and directly upgrade its ability to improve survivability, as well as damage, then you get the Necromancer. So I don't think it's fair to put Necro and Mystic on the same tier, simply because Necro can heal by pressing spacebar and stealing from Oryx's health, and it simply just has better survivability because of that lifesteal ability. Next up is one of my favorite classes and an easy S tier in my opinion, and that is the Ninja. Now you may be thinking, the Samurai, which uses the same weapon and has better armor, is stuck down in C tier. So what gives Ninja the edge? Well, that's pretty simple when you really think about it. The ability of the Ninja, if not doing damage, is absolutely fantastic at just getting away from any bad situation fast. You press spacebar, you're zooming, you're absolutely out of there. If you need speedy, maxed or unmaxed, just press spacebar. And you don't even have to have a good star in order for it to be viable. And if you do have a good star, that's a bonus. Because similar to the Assassin, you can do ranged damage relatively viably. The hitbox on the star is better than that of the quiver or the archer's quiver, so it's already better in that aspect and does a heap ton of damage. So if Oryx is doing a phase where he's stationary and you need to push in for damage, then you can quickly zoom in and zoom out. Or if he's stationary and you need to stay far away, you can chuck some ninja stars in there and you're going to get a few thousand damage in. The Pally and the Samurai I view very similarly, except for the Pally can heal itself. So, in turn, I think the Pally is better than the Samurai. Unfortunately, the healing of the seal got nerfed somewhat recently, so it's not as good, but it's just slight upgrade over the Samurai in my opinion. You still have to push in. It's not fantastic, but if you're trying to get your first complete, those heals are very helpful. Next up is the Priest, and this one was almost an S tier in my opinion because of how good it is at surviving because of that spacebar. And if you buy a Geb Tome, and if you are looking to complete Oryx 3 for the first time, if you have the funds to buy or a friend who's willing to give you a Geb Tome, then it's an easy S tier class because of the Speedy. But without Speedy, the Priest is still super viable. Being able to heal up basically more than an HP pot's worth of health whenever you need by just pressing spacebar, super useful. And you really don't have to push in at all to do damage. You have that insane range of the wand, and because you're feeling comfortable, because you have the Priest ability to heal, you can just blast away from a distance. The only drawback, you're a rogue class, so you are squishy. But other than that, it's a really solid class. Rogue for me was an interesting one to try and place because of the criteria of the tier list, but with the criteria of the tier list, I think B tier is pretty safe to put Rogue at. It's not fantastic for surviving, but it is really solid. It has its nice little quirk, a get out of jail free card. If you're getting chased and someone else is relatively close to Oryx and you press spacebar, then Oryx will instantly aggro onto the other person, meaning that you get away safely. Is it kind of toxic? Is it kind of spooky for the other person? Yeah, sure, but you're chilling, and if you're a new player, most likely whoever is getting the aggro is slightly more skilled than you. On top of that, leather is better than robes for survivability, and the speed of the rogue is super nice as well. It's not so fast that you feel out of control most of the time, but it is fast enough, especially paired with the cloak, to get you out of most any sticky situation. While not necessarily great for surviving your first time, the damage and risk-reward ratio for the Sorcerer is fantastic, which is why it's going to go into B tier. The class has the same range as the Priest when it comes to the wand, and the ability does a solid amount of damage and is relatively spammable. The Sorcerer shouldn't be getting in very many sticky situations because you can stay far away from the boss at almost all times and still be doing damage. The Bard, similar to the Huntress and the Archer, just not great. The ability is good for team damage if you're trying to increase range and the group overall is not very skilled, so you need people to have the extra range to be getting damage. But with that said, that's not really your purpose here as a new player. So having a robe and a bow and a slow class, it's just a bad mix. Easily a D tier, could be an F, but not quite that bad. Revisiting the top of the tier list, we go and get the Trickster. The Trickster is fantastic, and the reason that it's so high is because of how good it is for first time survivability. That is its bonus, and that was the bonus criteria, but the first time survivability boost from this character is insane. It's better than the Priest because instead of having to tank and then heal, which is risky, you just jump over or jump away from anything that could be remotely risky. And not only can you jump away, there's a decoy left behind. So if you TP far enough away, Oryx is just going to aggro onto the decoy, giving you a free chance to reposition, gather yourself, heal a little bit, before anything could possibly be at risk to you again. Except for phases like Cosmos or stationary tornadoes, which can be slightly sketchy even on a Trickster. Trickster's just fantastic. And not only that, similar to the Ninja, if you need to go in for damage and it gets sketchy, TP out. You don't have to run away, you don't have to dodge your way out, you can just TP away. And the most decisive reason for Trickster being this high is because of Heavens. As a new player, Heavens are one of the sketchiest things to do, especially if Oryx is coming to chase you while you have to cross. If you don't know the beam timing, well, that's not an issue on the Trickster. You just press spacebar and boom, you TP'd over it. You're fine, you're chilling. And for that reason, Trickster gets an S tier because of how easy it can get in and out and how fantastic it is for a first complete. Now, I love Warrior. Warrior is my main class. It is my homie. It is my beloved. But I can't put it in S tier because it just simply does not have the same level of escapability / damage that the Ninja and Trickster does. The Ninja is very similar to the Warrior in that it can get out and get in relatively safely because of the speedy, and the Trickster has just a broken ability for surviving. Warrior is really solid in all aspects of the fight, but it is a melee, doesn't have that fallback like the Ninja to shoot from distance with the Ninja Star, so it has to go in for its damage, and it doesn't have an OP ability for surviving, so it goes in A tier. And last but not least, the Wizard. Very similar to the Sorcerer, serves basically the same function, and very similar in survivability, is B tier. The Wizard does great damage at low risk because you're staying far away, but with that low risk because of that high range, you are squishy, so if you get into a sticky situation, it can be a little bit difficult and you may be forced into Nexus. But other than that, the Wizard is really just fantastic. And that concludes part 1. Keep in mind, if you're going to bash my list or hate on it for any reason, keep in mind the criteria. This isn't meant to be in-game. Wizard I know is super viable and will be higher up in the tier list when it comes to part 2. If you're watching this the first day of release, then subscribe. Wait until tomorrow, and the next part will be up then. Or maybe 2 days. We'll see. College is busy. But if you're watching this anytime after the first day, I will link the part 2 down in the description or in the info card in the top right. So, with that said, thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy, and comment what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I will see you in the next one. Have a great one, and peace.